Hi, my name is Carlos Gutierrez. I am the Executive Director of Cinema Tropical and co-programmer with Cecilia Barrio Nuevo of Neighboring Scenes. And we're very thrilled to be screening wonderful films from Latin America on our sixth edition, which needless to say, has to be online this year. But I'm very happy to have one of our guest filmmakers, Guatemalan director Sebastián Lojo, with his debut feature, Los Fantasmas. Sebastián, a great pleasure.
Hi, Carlos. First of all, you can't believe how happy I am to be here. The selection that you've had through the years in Neighboring Scenes is amazing, and the idea of this being one of the first after Santa Barbara, the first space that we're in the United States is incredibly. I don't know. It's like a dream, if you want. So thank you for having us in this selection. Really.
On the contrary, very happy to offer this space to you. It's such an accomplished debut feature that premiered at the Rotterdam Film Festival last year. It's been over a year since the film has been circulating. And what I found very interesting about your film is that it's a fairly short film, 75 minutes. Mm-hmm. But yet it's a very packed film that in the sense that it's a character study that plays like a stylized noir thriller, and then has hints of social realistic drama, and all made with some tools of nonfiction filmmaking. So yeah. it's a very, I find it a very interesting the way you combine all of these elements. So let's start from the beginning. What motivated you to tell this to focus on these two characters on telling the story of these two characters in Guatemala City?
The genesis, if you want, of the whole thing was a mix of stories that I had heard through the years being Guatemalan and living in Guatemala all my life until 5 years ago. And this idea of crime almost as an unconscious act of rebellion when the world doesn't allow for people to engage legally in a kind of dynamic where people have actual sense of agency, whether it's political or economic or personal, let's say. And it was also a very instinctive process of trying to marry these different storylines not storylines necessarily, but these characters and these moments, because it started even more with moments than stories. It started with me going to this wrestling place where we see Carlos, for example. Mm-hmm. And I had gone like 5 times with Esvin, who's a production designer of the film, co-production designer, my very good friend. He's a plastic artist, but we had been going there. And there's this beautiful, tragic nature to this place in which these men and women devote themselves purely to their characters in this Mexican wrestling style, which in Guatemala is not big. And every weekend they turn a parking lot into an actual wrestling arena. And even if they have from like 75 to 200, maybe 300 on the biggest matches, people in there, these are incredibly faithful fans. So you have this people that might work as bouncers in discos or as bartenders or as domestic employees, and then they're spending their money to create their costumes, because the value comes from being recognized in that moment, in that single moment, as something, whether it's the bad guy or the good guy, let's say, because there's narratives in this thing, and that was beautiful and at the same time very tragic in a way. And then there was this idea of talking about violence and masculinity and having a character that actually can weaponize this kind of charisma, social capital, and his own body in order to gain this kind of agency through these acts of violence. And now I'm speaking about it, if you want, very, very clearly, but at the time it was much more of an intuitive marrying of the circumstances. And then from the beginning, I knew that I wanted to, because understanding the gaze of a director, I knew that I didn't want to come and impose my way of looking at things necessarily, even if you have, of course, the directorial control, but that the meat of the narrative bones that I had mixed and matched here was going to come from the actual people that I would meet. I didn't want to cast actors in the main characters, Carlos and Koki, because I wasn't concerned necessarily with the ability to perform a a fictionalized character or to deliver lines. It was much more important for me, the relationship that they had with the spaces and the materiality of the spaces, and with the camera, the lens, and the distance from the camera to the character. Yeah, and this brought me to a place where most of the elements that surround this bones of this structural bones actually come from them. For example, Koki's son was never written. This is actually Koki's son in the film, and we ended up bringing it thoughtfully into the structure, but it was always through the process of research that we were finding this activities that would fill out the circular structure that the film has. For example, the billiards, Carlos in his house, the hotel, and all of these things. Let's say.
So I'm just going back a little bit. So you went to this lucha libre, this wrestling arena, and that's where you met Carlos.
When it came to the time to make the film, we didn't even cast for actors. We just went to the lucha, talked to the organization, and then talked to the different people, and said that we were doing a project and that we were very interested in the space itself, and for someone to actually collaborate with us. So I talked to some people that from a distance seemed correct, again, intuitively. And then we ended up meeting Carlos. And Carlos had this very strange mix of being so stoic. He's like a rock, if you want, in his gaze, in his body. If you see in some moments of the film, it feels as if the film stopped because he's so still. But when you see through his eyes and you put the camera in front of him, there's a kindness behind all the hyper masculine elements that he might have in front, let's say. So that was something that was really attractive to me. And the same thing with Koki. I knew that the breakdancing scene in Guatemala is popular, and they have a small social capital, even if they're great, again, because in Guatemala, the artistic infrastructure from government or private spaces don't give space for most artists to actually live off this. Even if they have won competitions and so on and so forth, they still are people that have a secondary job, most of them, and then they dance, but they are recognized in a small social circle. So I asked for an introduction and then hung out with a couple of groups, and I had Koki and another person that I was seeing, and it was never an audition. It was being with them, talking about the film, talking about their lives, and see if we can actually connect, and if they would allow me to borrow from their lives and fictionalize it in a way. And it was interesting because at some moments, because they didn't have experience acting per se, even if they're both performance in their own right, there was this thing of, Koki was asked at a moment, is this a documentary about me? And it was this bridge between the documentary part, because he's named himself, we're shooting in his house, we're shooting with his son, but he's not a robber in real life that seduces people in order to take away their belongings. So there was this blurred line that was very, very useful, I think, for this mix that you talked about at the beginning in the film.
I also find very intriguing this duality that you were referring to just moments ago. This duality of Carlos, he's a hotel owner, but at the same time, he's a wrestler. Koki is also, he's a parent and he works as a tourist guide, but he's a con artist at night.
Yeah.
I find those dualities and how they mirror each other very fascinating. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm very interested in how in most societies, but I'm going to speak specifically of Guatemala, like there's a hyper masculinity that is tied to this idea of power, let's say, of how you gain agency as a man is to exerting your own masculinity, if you want. So Carlos is a man, if you want, that Koki could be in 30 years, a man that even if he has this kind eyes, he has been roughed up enough so that he knows how things works. He knows how the world works. Not in a conscious way. He's not making speeches about it or anything, but there is a thing that this glimmer of hope or yearning for some kind of connection between earnest connection, let's say, instead of a transactional nature that everyone has almost disappeared. And Koki, even if he is strong, even if he is dominant in his own right, we can feel that there's something alive in him, yearning for something in the film that's still not, that is never completely clear, but it has to do something with this idea of recognition, connection, and going beyond the transactional nature of things. And that's why they sometimes function as business partners. They sometimes function almost as father and son kind of dynamic when Koki comes after being beaten up. But at the end of the day, doesn't matter whether they wanted whether there was care or not between them. Once Koki becomes not useful, he is immediately dispatched, And for Carlos, he's not, the idea was that he's never the villain. This is just the way the world works, and got hit in the face by that fact, let's say, if you want to. So yeah, there was this thing in there that I wanted to create where there was a connection, and hopefully in the scene where they together, it comes together. And then the betrayal, which is the only real narrative anchor of the film, is that turning point of when Koki leaves because of this. But yeah, there's this, like, the world that Carlos belongs to is not the one that Koki can engage with. And who knows if there's a world in which this Koki of this moment in history, in the world of the film, can actually engage and find this idea of disconnection, let's say.
Sure. I'm going to get back to this to this point, kind of a criticism of late capitalism, but also kind of the ending, because also was very intrigued. But before we get into that, another, I think, fascinating aspect of your film is that it's that more than plot driven, it's more about the sensational. You created a very it's a very stylized film in many ways. So let's talk first about how did you work with your cinematographers? It seemed like a very detailed.
Vincenzo has been working with me since 6 years ago in the London Film School, where we met. And he knew from the beginning what we were going for. And I also work as a cinematographer as a secondary thing. And we collaborate as camera operator, cinematographer, gaffer, cinematographer. So we have a lot of rapport with each other. So the way it was pre-production in terms of references and principles of how to dialogue with these spaces. It was for example, in terms of lighting, one of the main principles was to never try to beautify the way that light would work in these places, because for me, the most interesting thing about inhabiting the real spaces that our real characters inhabit is to dialogue with the materiality of those spaces, and not to come and bring a more traditional, for example, Netflix series aesthetic into this place. But this didn't mean either to disregard completely the idea that we are manipulating or shaping or utilizing the elements at our disposal in order to bring a very specific aesthetic. So it was about using sources that actually belonged in the place, buying a lot of practical lighting that, according to our plan, he would execute a measure by himself using hard light, which is not that common in contemporary filmmaking. Most things are very soft right now, but again, with a lot of precision, or as much as we could during the most time. And in terms of the framing, it was very important that, as you say, it wasn't about having an over the shoulder and having this long conversation scene that eventually takes us someplace. The way that the dialogue was created was actually not a single line of dialogue was written. It was mostly about the way that people spoke was much more important than what they said. But in the middle of this, like by going through the motions, understanding where I can put the idea of, we need to involve this here because this is going to be slightly important. But for example, when Koki's talking about the ghosts with Daniela, all of that is just sessions of being together in a room, the cinematographer and the two of them and us, and finding intuitively this progression of mix of trying to connect and not. And for that, because of this reason, and also because I wanted to again, as you say, have a film of texture and not of narrative necessarily. Not that narrative is not important, but in a secondary layer. We design our shots so that they would hold longer spans amount of time, because we wanted to dialogue with time differently, in a more, let's say, contemplative way. So it was a good marriage, because we didn't have the ability to do 7 angles for a scene, for example, because the dialogue would keep on changing. But at the same time, the intention was to find the right camera position and the specific camera position for each moment. So there was never coverage of, let's have this 6 shots that cover this scene and then we choose. It was shot to cut, even if sometimes we changed the order or a scene came here and whatnot. But it was, okay, we have 3 shots. We have a wide, then I want to cut into a close-up that is going to open this transition in sound that will take us as a bridge to here. And when we got there, the first thing was being with the actors a bit, but also already putting the camera there and understanding how they dialogue with the blocking in there. Because also being non-actors is a hard thing to pull off, or I don't know if hard, but it requires a lot of precision to be able to have a locked off camera or a pan, then a tilt, then they go into a wide shot and then they come into a close-up. But it was marrying the qualities of both approaches, let's say, instead of the seduction, the possible seduction of grabbing the camera and following them around because they are non-actors, let's say. We reserved the handheld for very specific moments during the film. Yeah.
But in essence, sounds like very challenging, was it? Like a very challenging shooting.
The thing is, because we knew how we wanted to work in terms of these principles, lenses, like I'm being very short here, but talking about lenses, like what kind of focal length is the way that we want to observe people, all of these things. And also with the production, in terms of the smaller we were, the happier I was. Yeah. So we would change size of crew depending on the setup that we had. And this is the way we wanted it. And because we didn't overschedule shots, we had the possibility of doing 2 scenes per day, let's say. Yeah. And also in terms of money, what allowed us to have this very, very lucky 5 weeks or 4 weeks and a half that we had was the fact that a lot of the people from the crew came to London, that I met here from France, from Lebanon, from different countries, and they were paying. We had been working together for years, so most of them came with their own resources because of the excitement of the project, which is a one-time thing only, and I'm incredibly grateful. You know, it's like, this is the first film and this is the only time one can pull off these things, but I still have to pay forward some of the favors that I called in terms of being able to have the necessary crew that understood how I wanted to work in terms of the methodology of the production, because it was out of the ordinary in terms of a traditional production, let's say.
So you're bringing the topic of the financing of a film. So it's a film shot in Guatemala, Guatemalan director with an international crew, co-produced by Argentina and post-produced in Mexico. I guess can you elaborate a little more in terms of the context of within Guatemalan cinema?
Yeah, to be honest, if the film wasn't shot in Guatemala, it wouldn't have been possible to shoot what I wanted to shoot. But there's something really nice about Guatemala still, where even if there's not so much infrastructure, and this is awful in most ways because it doesn't allow the gremio to actually exist and professionalize itself and so on and so forth, but it allowed us to create a production of relationships. So for example, with the bar, we went multiple times and we became accustomed to the space. With the hotel, same thing. With the wrestling, same thing. So it was never a very pure transactional hard cash interaction, you know? So for example, with the wrestling, we made the deal that we would give them some footage so that they could use it in their promotional things. The hotel charged us money, but it charged way less than what it would charge something else because of the relationship that we we created, and it made it very almost like family, like a family kind of production, even if we have a lot of locations and we're shooting outside or whatnot. But this allowed us to shoot with a minuscule, very, very small budget. The only reason why we managed to shoot with an Arri Alexa Mini and K35s, which were the lenses that I wanted, is because I had created a relationship with a London rental company, and we managed to bring camera and lenses for 5 weeks for $5,000, which is crazy. Now that I think about it, at the time I wasn't even thinking about these things, but now in Guatemala, if you want to rent an Arri Alexa Mini, you get $1,000 per day, So because there are so few. So this kind of elements and this idea of making a production that was as small as possible, both from a creative standpoint, because I wanted like this, I didn't want the intrusion of a big production, but also from an economic one. We were tight. It was stressful. I had to dig even more into my savings, but to be honest, I took out some small loans and stuff, but we managed to shoot it with around the shooting budget of the film ended up being around between $30,000 and $40,000, which is very small for a feature film that has like ambitions of multiple locations, exteriors, interiors, and all of these things. And then what ended up happening is that we got accepted into a lab, post-production lab in Argentina called Labix. And it was our first foot into the filmmaking world, if you want, because none of us had actually done any films that were at any big festivals. So we didn't have any ins, maybe, if we could call it that. And after that, doors started opening. So we even won the Cinema Tropical Award in that lab, and this is how we met with you. But after that, an Argentinian co-producer contacted us, Bernabé de Mossi, with Perro Suelto, and he wanted to be a part of the film because he understood that we were inexperienced in maybe not the filmmaking side. Well, we were also in that, but we were more certain in terms of what we wanted to do, but we didn't know anything about the landscape of this kind of cinema. And he jumped on board and got a lot of services for us in terms of post-production. And eventually, we ended up going to Splendor Omnia in Mexico to do the final sound and the final color, or just a small color pass, but the final sound, mainly, that was the main element. And it all happened because Vincenzo, the cinematographer, went to a Carlos Reiga's screening here in the UK, and he told him, hey, look, I shot a Guatemalan film. Do you want to watch it? He sent it, he watched it, and they ended up treating us like family. Splendor Omnia was the best thing that could have happened in the post-production to the film. It was incredible. The price that they gave us and the level of quality and commitment to a film and a director that they didn't have a previous relationship with was incredible, with Anais and Ernie and Carlos and Natalia. Like it was, and now we already have the idea of continue collaborating for my next film, but finishing the film there was similar to being here, like a dream in the famous Splendor Omnia Studios, and the result was far better than I could have imagined in terms of the quality of their work. So more or less, this is how it ended up happening.
So the way you produce a film, basically, it's the opposite of what basically you're criticizing in the film, in the sense that, or I guess my socio-political reading of a film is of this state that where the citizens are just led by themselves and it's to its own. And once an interaction between them is just, once you use it, you just, you could throw it away, as in the case of Koki, So in that sense, I mean, I also fascinating that you create that kind of this criticism to like capitalism, and particularly set in Guatemala. Yeah,
to be honest, I'm very interested in methodology, and if you could say that exactly, like the film is talking about the transactional nature that a society like the Guatemalan society has after all the years of colonization, then internal conflict, and then of course 100 years of the United States impositions of all over Latin America, and the result that is an incredibly fragmented and not cruel that everyone is cruel, but it's a very cold understanding of existence, if you want, where if I don't see you, you are not present. And this is more or less why the idea of los fantasmas came. For most people that hold wealth, power, and privilege, including me to a certain extent, me not be coming from the context that Koki comes, everything is designed to be completely compartmentalized so that we don't engage with any single issue that Guatemala might carry, whether it's extreme poverty, which is incredibly high, above 25%, which is poverty, which is above 60%, class, race, and history, So the idea was, again, to have these elements permeate the film, but in terms of the material consequences that they have had in the daily lives of these specific individuals, instead of trying to make, so it comes in a tangential way, instead of trying to make an overt didactic statement about the current state of Guatemala. And hopefully this approach what allowed us of putting the narrative in a second layer, but concentrating on sensation and presence. Hopefully what this does is it allows people to ask questions or questions themselves, and myself also, because it's also a process of exploring for myself, instead of just giving cookie cutter answers or having the presumption to have cookie cutter answers or black and white judgments of circumstances, That's also why no one is a hero, no one is a villain in the film, in any of the characters. No one is this idea of good and evil is not present in the film. It's about how do I engage with the circumstances that are right in front of me. That's why the crime is not judged as a sin, even if it's not, and it's not lauded as a triumph. Let's say it's not a glorification of the crime. It's you came back to the same bar multiple times and you got caught, and because of that you got disposed of. And this is just how the material circumstances would operate, or in the world of the film, at least, without the judgment of good and bad, hopefully, for the audience.
Sure. But in that sense, can you tell more about the title of the name, Los Fantasmas, the ghost, in the sense that, from what I was saying, at least my reading about, these citizens being disposable, being a ghost to a state, and they just wander around in the city.
That's the original. I wanted from the beginning to have something to do with fantasmas with the title, but to be honest, I was afraid that Lisandro Alonso's film Fantasma already existed, so I was like, I can't use that word. But from the beginning, it was the feeling of the film, because I believe that a lot of the time when we're having these discussions between, we fall a lot into retrospective, very clear analysis of what we did. But at the time, there was this intention of talking about this invisibilization process, but the feeling was of ghosts that are looking to be seen in unconscious ways, So that's why we concentrated so much in the quotidian elements, and we have and we use ellipsis a lot of the time when the exciting things happen. Yeah, so we skip what a normal, as you were saying, noir film or action film would concentrate, which is a pleasure of the actual violence or the action. And we go with the before and after, if you want to have this melancholy that lies in the before and after. But coming back a bit to this, it was this idea of people trying to gain agency in a world that doesn't recognize them as people. That in a world where they don't have any real agency through any legal means, because it was designed for most of the population to never gain access where there is economic capital or cultural, artistic, in any way, is designed to segregate most of the population, 90% of the population, and accumulate wealth, power, and economic and cultural capital on the top layer of society. And this is so internalized in Guatemala, in the Guatemalan society, that that it wasn't, I would believe that it would be in bad faith to have characters that would openly rebel against this in the kind of film that I was interested in doing so. And that's why for me, the crime elements are an unconscious rebellion and an unconscious yearning of grabbing some feeling of importance, some feeling of recognition, even if it's through those means, if you want, or Carlos through the wrestling, let's say. So yeah, of course.
We only have time for one last question. I'm also very intrigued about the ending. My own reading was at least hopeful in a way, at least that the character, without giving too much, of course, that the character at least it's in another setting, and a kind of a big contrast between the urban and at least another setting, an non-urban setting. I mean, can you just elaborate on that ending? And at least he breaks at least momentarily from that system. And as a second question, I'm just also intrigued about that cover version of Cucurruc Paloma that you used in that sequence on the series.
So this idea, the first iteration was to finish the film with the travel. I shouldn't reveal exactly what, right?
It's not my plural. Keep it as big as possible.
Yeah. Okay. So the first idea was to finish the film when we are leaving the city, and the lake actually came very late in the pre-production because of the work that we were doing with Koki, with the cinematographer, with being there, with Luis Andres, the main producer, with the crew working there, and simmering on the things that I was interested in trying to tap into. And all of a sudden, this idea of there's nothing here left, like this, the value that Koki had for him is completely taken away from him. So this power or this agency, even if it was small, that he had is completely, not even cruelly, like very dryly or coldly just ripped from him, if you want. And then something else stopped, which is this hope that when we move off a geographical space, things might be different. Like I think everyone, regardless of the circumstance, geographically and in terms of territory, believes that the moving of a place might bring some kind of different fortune, let's say. And so the main thing there was to have a feeling that not necessarily of hope. Again, it's an ambivalent feeling. It's an ambivalent feeling in which Koki all of the sudden is completely alone, but in a different place. So how is that loneliness different from the one in the city where everything is so intense, we're all compacted all the time, and the way it's represented in the film? But it was to subvert the idea of the lake as a paraíso, as a paradise, that Koki might be able to achieve what he's looking for, but more of a continuation of this untangible, I'm going to call it existential search, because he doesn't even know what he's looking for. And I can't even tell you exactly what he's looking for, but this is something that attacks us all. He's looking for something. He's looking for some kind of thing that clicks. And by the end of the film, he still doesn't find it, but he's swallowed by this landscape. He's swallowed by this landscape.
Right.
The one that opens doors instead of giving you a resolution, like he dies or he, I don't know, whichever it might be. I find it a bit similar to like one of the things that really talked to me when I was thinking of that ending, because it was completely, again, instinctual at the time. It was in Liverpool by Lisandro, when the main character just disappears into the line of woods and we stay with the daughter all of a sudden, and this character just was swallowed by a whole continent right there, and there's something very interesting about this, the land swallowing this man, and then he disappears. And there was something very instinctively appealing for me in terms of this ending that wasn't satisfactory narratively, but I think it's satisfactory in the way of sensation, to be honest.
Well,
and Cucurucucu, We were editing that section where that song is in the film with my editor, and I had two editors, one Malaysian and one from Hong Kong, and luckily the Keenan Young and Terence Chim, and luckily the film, as I said, doesn't rely on the information of the dialogue. If not, it would have been a pain. But because of the way that the film functions, it actually worked out really well. And we were banging our heads with this sequence, and it didn't hold. Something was missing, even if the shot is very strong and all of these things. And then I wake up one day and he tells me, why don't you come listen to this? And he shows me this obscure Korean version of Kukurukuku Paloma that ended up, and I had resistance at the beginning, but now I can't even think of the film without it, because I had thought that the film would have no non-diegetic music, like at least for this film, I felt like that was the right thing. So getting away from that was hard. But eventually when I saw it and we found the right length and all of these things, what it does is that it connects us, like Latin Americans in general, if you want, with this tenderness, but the version that we found is extremely melancholic and not tender, and it's not upbeat. It feels, it has a completely different sensation, again, than what we would expect from the song itself. And it ended up being this, I think it fit really well, and it allowed us to actually give oxygen to a film in which characters don't emote openly. So all of a sudden, I feel like the audience gets oxygenated without understanding that we needed it. So it feels like a recycling of the materials all of a sudden. And I don't know, it ended up working really well. And we ended up contacting the band, contacting the rights. This was one of the most, we spent more time and resources on that than on anything other than in any other thing. The producer wanted to kill me because we came up with the idea so late in the production. But yeah, it was a beautiful surprise that came from my editor.
Well, Sebastián, great pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Carlos. And I hope everyone enjoys the film or manages to connect the film with the film in some way. And really, thank you for having me in Neighboring Scenes. And I wish we were both in New York, but it will be another year. And thank you for doing it. Yeah.
Hopefully soon. Thank you.